Do you have kiddos today? Does somebody have kiddos? All the little girls are looking at me like, are we staying here for this? Have you ever seen a church with only little girls? Our church has only little girls. It's wild. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Felicity White, if we have not met. My husband, Dan, was the guy playing the piano. My father-in-law is Pastor Don. And last night, we were sitting at Smokin' Oak Pizza, where Dan was doing music, which may or may not have contributed to his scratchy throat this morning. Who knows? The night air. And my friend said, are you leading worship tomorrow? And I said, no, tomorrow I'm the preacher. She's like, oh, what are you preaching on? And I was like, well, Jesus announcing his crucifixion to the disciples, the transfiguration, the passage about, if you try to save your life, you'll lose it. And she was like, oh. And then we just kind of went on to another conversation. And afterwards, I was like, oh, you know what I didn't say was, I didn't choose those passages. Like, I'm not looking for the most difficult, heavy passages in the book of Mark. You know, the way we do the preaching schedule here varies every time, right? But a lot of times, we'll have a sermon series. The weeks are laid out, and Matt and Nikki will say, have a look through the weeks and see which one kind of speaks to you and which one you want to preach on, right? And so then you kind of get to pick and choose, right? The ones that you're like, ooh, I'm good at talking about this. I'm good at talking about this. But this time, I didn't do it that way. Because our schedules were pretty tight, I kind of had to just pick by weekend. And so then I had to just go, oh, I wonder what I got from the book of Mark. There's all these great miracle stories. There's like, oh, feeding of 5,000, feeding of 5,000. Please let it be that. And then I was like, oh, 8. We're in chapter 8, verse 31 through chapter 9, verse 13. We're going to read it together. You can all chuckle to yourselves a little bit about how Felicity got these passages. Okay. And he began to teach them. And by the way, I'm reading a version that's slightly different than what is up there. I'm sorry. I don't have the wrong Bible. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. And Peter took him aside. Oh yeah, I forgot about this part. Peter getting called Satan. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." And calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." Don't worry, there's more. And then he said to them, "Truly, I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God after it has come with power." And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became radiant, intensely white, as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah and Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah." For he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. and a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." And suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them, but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, he charged them to tell no one about what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning, "What is this rising from the dead and what it might mean?" And they asked him, "What do the scribes say? Why do the scribes say that Elijah must come?" And he said to them, "Elijah must come first to restore all things. And how is it written that the Son of Man, that he should suffer many things and be treated with contempt? But I tell you that Elijah has come, and they did to him whatever they pleased, as it was written of him." So there it is, our text for the day. And as I'm reading stuff like this, which I think would fit into the category of hard sayings of Jesus, wouldn't you say? Have you ever read one of those books? Like, these are the hard sayings of Jesus. And I'm always like, I don't want to read that book, right? I'm going to move on. But a lot of things have just worked on me this week, and I want to share those with you. The setup for this passage comes from last week. Don talked about the declaration that Peter and the disciples made. "Jesus, you're the Messiah." He said, "Who do you say that I am?" They said, "You're the Messiah." And this realization is a turning point in the book of Mark, because once they recognized this, once Jesus saw that they knew who he was, and of course they didn't understand what that meant and everything, but once they were willing to say, "Oh, we get it. This is who you are. You're not just some cool teacher that we're following through the wilderness. You're the guy. Like, we recognize that." Now Jesus starts talking to them. There's a shift, and he starts talking to them in a different way. So that's interesting to me to think about, right? Because you talk to your own kids differently than your neighbor's kids most of the time. Because hopefully they kind of get it, and your neighbor's kids, you don't know what they're getting, right? So if they come charging through the house, this is a terrible example, but it's all I've got. They come charging through the house, and mud's everywhere, and the dog's trailing wet, as they're running through, you might be like, hey, guys, next time, try to use the back door or something like that. But when your kids get back home, it's going to be like, "What were you thinking? Why did you do that? You know to take off your shoes outside. You talk to them differently." And that's kind of what happens here. There's a shift in the way Jesus is talking to the disciples. That it's not always comfortable. But there's a couple of things that leading up to this that have really set us up for this. So when Matt was preaching a couple of weeks ago, I guess it was, you know how you are. You sit and you listen to preaching. I mean, guys, we're people who listen to a lot of preaching, right? And it's really easy to be like, "Yeah, this is good stuff. I've heard this before. I know this story. I know how this goes. I'm practically a professional Christian at this point," right? It's a lot of years I've been doing this. But Matt was talking about, and I don't remember exactly how you said it, Matt, but it was basically that notice that Jesus didn't stop talking to the Pharisees. He didn't get out of conversation with them. Yeah, they were religious, and when we talk about the bad guys in Jesus' life, a lot of times it's the religious Pharisees. But Jesus never said, "And that's it, I'm not giving you anything else. You don't deserve to be in conversation with me anymore." He kept talking to them. He kept sharing with them. He kept answering, in his way, their questions. And I was so sort of convicted by that. Like, Felicity, you stopped talking to people. And that's not the example of Jesus. You stopped interacting with people who believe differently than you, even within Christian circles, because you thought that they didn't want to listen to you. You didn't want to listen to them. Conversation was over. And I was just struck by, wow, I am not like Jesus. I'm not following his example. So that's how I wanted to come to this passage today, was with that kind of, what is Jesus saying and doing, and how am I either meeting that expectation or not, personally? Because I don't think we would have carried this word, this gospel, through thousands of years of time. So we could just read it and say, yeah, that's how it worked then. That was the story then. That's how it went for Jesus. But it has to be real to us today, to me today. What Jesus is saying has to be have impact on my life. And not just in a, yes, this is what I believe kind of way, but in a changing kind of way. So then last week, Don was talking about Jesus being both resistant to both the political and the religious leaders. That like he didn't find a good ideological home in either of those places. And that resonated with me too. It's like, yeah, if we are a people of the Spirit, of a different belonging, then we're not going to fall in line perfectly with one political ideology or one religious ideology, because Jesus is something else. And we're going to see that in this passage. So the disciples here they're ready to hear something new about Jesus being the Messiah. And when Jesus starts talking, he starts talking about losing. But they're ready. And he starts saying, we're going to lose. Yeah, like the ultimate kind of lose where you're not alive anymore. And this is so unexpected that Peter corrects him, right? Peter's like, whoa, my dude. We just got it, right? We just know now that you're the Messiah. But you're saying you're going to lose. But that's not what Messiahs do. So you might be confused about what a Messiah is. Because Messiahs don't lose. And Jesus is like, I'm going to lose. I'm going to die. And everything that poor Peter, bless Peter, because this is his story, right? He probably told this story to Mark. Bless Peter for being vulnerable. And always showing us, because we're not done with Peter here, always showing us that it's okay to not get it. And it's okay to say what comes to mind and let Jesus correct you. That's how I felt the other Sunday when I was sitting here. So Peter corrects him. This is how easy it is to be in our own thoughts and ideologies, that when we hear Jesus literally say something to us, we'll go, nah, that can't be right. Jesus, no, you're going a little overboard, right? This is how easy it is. If everything doesn't match up with our ideas, it becomes a threat to us. This is what happened to Peter. Peter got Messiah, but then when Jesus said, I'm going to die, Peter's like, whoa. You might not understand or remember your Jewish teaching, Jesus. Messiahs don't lose. And Jesus has to rebuke this strongly. He has to come down quickly and say, no, Peter. You are the one who doesn't have this right. And I've felt that before. I'm sure you have felt that before. And I think this passage is telling us it's okay to feel that before, to feel that feeling of, I don't get it. I don't understand. What I feel like I'm being asked to do, I don't get. So the next section that Jesus goes into is the bit about you've got to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. And now he's talking to the whole group, the disciples and the people who have come to listen. So this was kind of playing on that political metaphor that Messiah had for the Jewish believers, that the Messiah would be the one who came to rule in a very practical, like presidential in our world kind of way. That's how they saw that. And Jesus is having to kind of break down that thought process. It's not going to be the way that you think it's going to be. Crucifixion, when Jesus said, take up his cross, It's that word cross that they automatically thought crucifixion. And the purpose of crucifying people in that world at the time was as this is from my commentary, a deterrent to insurrection. So the people who were crucified were the people who were trying to take over the government at the time. That's so when Jesus said that word, take up your cross, he was saying, this is going to be revolutionary. And Jesus says, in this revolutionary thing, follow me. Do it like me. Watch how I do it. And they don't know how he's going to do it, but they're still probably, as we can see from Peter, they're still probably thinking it's going to look very practical, like we want to be in charge for a change. We are the lowly Jewish believers, and we're in a Roman-controlled government, and we don't have any power, we don't have any say, we're being persecuted, and all of that was 100% true. It was a difficult time to be alive in the world. And yet, it was not going to happen the way that they thought. Jesus was going to do it in a different way. So Peter here is a stand-in for us all because he's missing something. But Jesus just says, watch me. Just watch. When he says, whoever is ashamed of me, this has always been a hard passage for me because I know God as fully loving and embracing, and I can't imagine God being ashamed of me, but I was thinking of it in this way, that Peter, he's ashamed of Jesus' way here. Jesus just told him, I'm going to die. I'm going to lose. And I feel like this was sort of the thing that Peter was ashamed of. Like, if the kingdom is coming, if the fullness of God is going to be in the world, surely it wouldn't look like you dying. That's embarrassing. That's weak. That's low. I think that is what Jesus is potentially referring to here, is that we're thinking about victory looking different than a physical battle, warrior-style winning. Jesus keeps focusing on loss, and it's confusing to their brains. When he goes on, he says, some of you are going to see the fullness of God before you die. And a lot of times people have thought that this was like an apocalyptic phrase, right? And that didn't really happen, right? I mean, we're still here. So the end of the world hasn't happened. But there was something about what Jesus was going to do, which was going to be suffer and die and rise again. They were going to see that. They were going to see that model of, and I've talked about this before, that model of like a seed dies in the ground and then is reborn, and that circle of life that Jesus demonstrates. In this thing about saving your life, Brené Brown says that fear is the thing that gets in the way of us leading well, loving well. And she says it's not because we're afraid, because everyone is afraid. There is no such thing as not being afraid. This is why you sometimes will confuse kids when you say, just be brave and do it. And they'll say, I don't feel brave. I feel very afraid. And what you actually are asking a kid to do, and yourself, is doing it even though you're afraid. That's what bravery is. You don't wait until the fear goes away, because it never does, and then you're brave. No, the brave is overcoming. So Brené Brown says this thing about our childhoods, our young adulthoods, our adulthoods kind of break us, right? They wound us. They hurt us. They do things to us, and we armor up, right? So a million situations you can probably think of where you had an emotional abuse or trauma, or just not tender care, and you armor up against that. Okay, I I'm not going to trust the way that I trusted that person. I'm not going to do that anymore. And you do that because you have to, because you need to survive. But then as a grown person, that armor that did good work for you now is in your way. Because it keeps you from getting to and loving and letting people love you the way you need to be loved. And so there is this piece when I hear that Jesus saying, if you try to save your life, you're going to lose it. It feels like that to me a little bit. Like sometimes we want to hold on, and then we don't have anything to give because we're hoarding. Or we're so afraid that we don't want to step into that new thing. And so we just keep experiencing, honestly, fear inside the house because we're too stuck behind our armor to step into life, right? And I feel like this is partially what Jesus is talking about here is like if you try to hold on to it too tight, and in this case, Peter, if you try to hold on to this idea of what a Messiah is and what it looks like, you're going to lose it. You're not going to be awake when it happens. And we know that Peter is so close to this, right? He almost misses it so many times. But he doesn't miss it because he changes every time. He keeps changing. He keeps not being afraid of changing. So then, the hard sayings, but there's like a tiny reward, right? Because now, Peter and John come with me up to the mountain. And they go up to the mountain and they get totally and completely freaked out, as you would if dead people started appearing before you. I mean, sometimes the Bible becomes, we don't want to call it a myth, but it becomes mythical because we read it like it's a cartoon. But if Jesus was really there and then suddenly they saw Elijah and Moses, which, by the way, how did they recognize them? I don't know. They didn't have comic book Moses and Elijah. I mean, you know what I'm saying? They didn't have photos. But anyway, they knew that's who was there. It's like this supernatural experience, cannot be explained. And Peter goes, it's good that we're here. Can you he sounds like a kid to me. Like, have you ever seen the meme of the little kid she's getting interviewed on TV, and she's like, how are you feeling on your first day of school? Are you feeling really brave and happy? And he's like, and then he starts crying. Like he's like, yes, I am. And then that's how I feel like Peter is right here. It's like, I'm smiling and brave, and it's good that we're here. And on the inside, he's like, oh my gosh. Because verse 6, which I love, I may have never been so excited about reading a verse in my life as that. Let me get to it. 9:6. No. Is it 9:6? Sorry, I'm looking through. Yes. Yeah, 9:6. For he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. So what's Peter say? The only thing he can think of is, it's good that we're here, I'm very brave, and we should build 3 tabernacles, one for Elijah, one for Moses, and one for you. Now that seems weird to us, but for Peter, that made perfect sense because every Jewish celebration that they had festivals where they built tabernacles to celebrate the great heroes of the faith. So what he immediately did was snapped into his religious mode and was like, I can't explain this. Wait, I know what to do. We should build tabernacles for everyone. That's what a good Jewish person would do. And so that's what I think we should do. And as you know, just as he says that, like immediately, because he didn't know what to say, a cloud overshadowed them. A voice came out of the cloud. This is my beloved son. Listen to him. And suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone but Jesus only. It's almost like the script had to be flipped so Peter could really get it. It's like whatever was happening, supernatural, mythical, there's so many things You know I love all the ways you could dive into Elijah. You could dive into Moses and all the things that it meant that Jesus was communing with them on this very mountain. There's so much to look at there, but just the part that struck me this time, was that Peter wanted to make it about what he knew, and Jesus/God/Holy Spirit just made it all disappear and said, listen to Jesus. Look at Jesus. Changed it for him. In every version of this story, and it's told in every one of the synoptic gospels, Peter's suggestion is followed directly by God's voice saying, this is my beloved son. This is my beloved son. Listen to him. And then Moses and Elijah disappear. They only see Jesus. And that's what has to be a huge takeaway for us, I think, is that perhaps we only need to see Jesus. And so then it goes to this final section. Coming down the mountain. Had this great experience. And the disciples start asking about Elijah. Shouldn't Elijah come? Like, it's not time yet, Jesus. Seems like almost what they're saying, right? It can't be. Okay, you're messing with our minds. You're gonna die. Okay, but first Elijah has to come, right? And Jesus, it's almost like he's like, yes. And Elijah came. His name was John the Baptist. If you remember, recently he was beheaded. They did what they wanted with him. Like, we're here, dudes. It's happening. And it's hard for you, and I get that. But I think there's something really powerful about them thinking about John the Baptist and Jesus mentioning John the Baptist. Because remember, at the opening of Mark, John the Baptist opens this story. And the baptisms in the Jordan River by John the Baptist, including Jesus, and it's the other time, right, that God speaks from heaven. This is my beloved son, in whom I'm well pleased. A little different this time. Last time he said, in whom I'm well pleased, and this time he says, listen to him. This river has great biblical significance, too. It's a boundary marker to the promised land. Remember that? Those stories? And it's the place where God provided for Elijah in the wilderness when he had no physical provision. It's the place where John welcomed Israel to come and remember their deliverance from Egypt. Think about the Israelites. They went into the water and they came out free. That's what baptism was a symbol for them. Come into the water and come out changed. Come out different. And it's a symbol, of course, because when we usually get baptized, we've already felt that change, right? But this baptism is a symbol of it, a recognition. But here Jesus reminds the disciples also of what happened to John. And I don't think the point of this section is to depress us, make us feel like everything is lost, as much as it is about inviting us to set aside our expectations. Even those religious and political ideas that we hold probably too close, and we all do. Those ideals feel safe to us. They feel familiar. That's honestly what psychologists say about that concept of armor, that sometimes we've used that armor to stay safe, and so there are things that feel safe to us that aren't safe anymore. But we've been conditioned to think that they were safe, and so we're still drawn to them. So I feel like that's something that's happening here, is we hold these things close. Those ideals we draw on when we're faced with the unexplainable, the uncomfortable, or especially when we're afraid. We fall back on those things. Let's build a tabernacle, right? But instead, I see the invitation here to open up to something about what God might want to do in a new age, a new time, a new you, a new me. An invitation to look upon the belovedness of Jesus, which is the belovedness of us, and listen to him. Listen to his Spirit's voice. Listen to, and now in the coming pages, in the coming chapters, watch what he does. Okay, at some point it's okay to be like, we don't get it. But now we've got to watch and see, what are we missing? And this is what you're going to see Peter do. You're going to see him try things, because that's important. Stepping out even when we're afraid, but being able to change, being able to rethink, being able to hear somebody say, and don't forget, Jesus still talked to the religious people and going, stab in my heart, and I'm going to change something. I'm going to make a change about that. Being able to hear the armor that you had to use to survive, it might not be working for you anymore. Let it go. Let it go. It's the only way that we're going to come through the Jordan into a new life that's truly led by the Spirit. Because that's Jesus' eventual promise, isn't it? I'm going to go. I have to go. And you might not understand it, and it might seem counter everything you've ever believed is going to happen, but I'm going to send you the Spirit. And it's going to be better than if I was here. And promise, no one who heard him say those words believed a word he said. But if that hadn't been true, then what would be the point of us being here today? If it wasn't true that the Spirit coming would be even better, then how could we find purpose in our life? And instead, we really, really can. Because these are great stories that set us up for a great, exciting, sometimes scary, always messing with our paradigms life. But the promise is, I will be with you. You are my beloved. Listen to Jesus. Amen? Let's pray. God, we are so thankful for your knowing of us. And I pray in this room today that you would come in the vulnerability of our posture, where we want to listen and hear. And I pray that you would open our hearts to hear and watch. See what you would like us to do. And know that every expectation we have might be shattered except for this one thing, that you have always been good. You will always be good. You will be faithful from generation to generation, and that is the legacy in the life that we live in. It's the strength that we live in. It's the grace that we live in. And we are facing nothing in our lives that you have not faced. We are facing nothing in our lives that you are not fully and completely aware of. And we might be surprised by how it works out. But we cannot be surprised by the way we feel, by the love that you surround us with, the peace that you provide in every circumstance. Help us as we go from here today to see you, to recognize the belovedness of our position, and to listen.